buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. Over me, yeah. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my own grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Good evening. My name is Frederick Douglass. But that is not my God-given name, however. Before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. But the man you see before you was a slave. I was born around 1817. My father was a white master by the name of Mr. Anthony. My mother, a slave woman, well, let's just say she had no say in the matter. Although I will always be grateful to Mr. Anthony for granting me the gift of life, I will always have hatred and disgust for his methods. But my mother I love very much. I only saw her a few times in my early life, but I remember how striking and beautiful she was. I only saw her, I do remember the last time I saw her as well. You see, it was unfortunately customary to separate children slaves from their mothers and fathers on plantations. It was terribly sad. We were treated like cows and chickens. So my mother and I were separated by more than a dozen miles by the time we could walk. I could walk. But she would walk all those miles to see me. Over 20 miles. 20 miles there and back. She would walk and make sure that I fell asleep for the night. She would rub me and hum until I fell asleep. When I awoke, she was gone. The last time I saw her, she never came back. I don't know what happened to her. But I love you, Mama. And I miss you every day. Biracial slaves, like myself, which were usually those related to their masters, received certain privileges. I was sent away to work at one of the main houses of a man by the name of Hugh Auld in Baltimore, Maryland. I had my own bed, a roof over my head, while I watched my fellow slaves sleep out in the dirt in the cold. We were also not allowed to read or write. We were not allowed to be educated at all or go to schools. But Mr. Alt's wife, Sophia Alt, secretly began to teach me my ABCs. And very quickly, I learned that letters became words, and words became sentences, and sentences paragraphs, and paragraphs books. But when Mr. Auld found out about this learning, he put a swift halt to my education. His words were angry and struck me deeply.
I forbid you to teach that boy, Sophia. I'm amazed at how simple you can be to not know that knowledge unfits a Negro child to be a slave. He is only an animal, meant to only work. Teaching them anything is unlawful, unsafe, and will surely lead to mischievous and sacrilegious ways and the end of our livelihood. Now, Sophia, is that what you want?
No, Mr. Auld couldn't stop me from learning, no. No, I was obsessed with it. I read books secretly as often as I could. I asked the white children, I befriended them, and asked them all kinds of grammar questions. And each answer made me more and more intelligent. But this knowledge that I was gaining became very threatening to my white masters. There was a fear, a shock in their eyes when they saw that I could write. It was that same fear that we as slaves have in our eyes every day. And that's when I knew knowledge was powerful. But unfortunately, so did they. So they sent me away to be under the care of a very mean cowhand by the name of Edward Covey. Covey had the reputation of breaking down Negro slaves with brutal force. He was proud to be good at it. His entire job was to make sure that I would never be educated again. He beat, whipped, kicked me many times. My spirit for learning was broken. My eagerness to read and write was gone. Until one day, I decided I had had enough. Death could be no worse than life here on Covey's farm. So if that meant I had to die fighting, so be it. So, one day, Covey was going about his brutal routine of kicking me and hitting me with any object he could find. It didn't matter what object it was as long as it was heavy and it would draw blood to run down your head and your back. But this time, as he came in for a blow, I found my spirit back. And as this act happened, I rose. And I must have looked so enraged because he looked so afraid. It was that same fear we see in our eyes. And I saw blood coming down his neck when my fingers were pressing into it. And now I wanted to see it run. Oh, that wasn't the end of the fight, no. No, it went on for 2 long, brutal hours. 2 hours. Other white men came in to try and break up the fight, but I kicked one in his chest so hard. They backed away and left Covey to myself. Two hours. But after those 2 hours, Covey never laid another hand on me again. It was a turning point in my life. I felt like I'd never felt before. I was no longer a cow or a chicken or a horse or a dog. I was a man. Strong. Equal. And someone who should be free. So, I decided it was time to plan my escape. Death was no longer an option. It was time to run away. I wanted to live this life no longer. And I had spent many years befriending other slaves who told me stories about freed slaves in northern states, slaves that were free. Then I also learned about something called a free paper. Now, this document was proof that you were no longer a slave and a free citizen. You had to keep this on you at all times, but when I knew that I could read and write, I learned how to duplicate this form. And not only for myself, but for other slaves so that they could have their freedom. So I took my copy and I ran away. And I had to show my false identification many times. Very afraid that they would see that it wasn't real, but it worked. I walked many miles, took trains, boats for 24 hours straight, so afraid that someone would find me and send me back to my white masters, but it never happened. And on September 3rd, 1838, I arrived in New York. Free! No, none of this could have ever happened if it wasn't for the help of a beautiful woman by the name of Anna Murray. She helped ensure my safety as I traveled north. She gave me money and knitted garments that I used as disguises. Another reason why I was never caught. Well, we found each other in New York and decided to start our life together.
Oh, Frederick, I am so happy to see you safe. All this time we've known each other, you were a slave. I never knew when you might be sent away to a new owner.
Oh, that is so true, Anna. But luckily, we got to spend some time in Baltimore to get to know each other and fall in love. And next, I would like for us to be married.
Oh, that would be wonderful! It is what I always dreamed of.
And I had to spend all your hard-earned money to get here. But we made it and we are together.
How did it feel when you first arrived?
Oh, Anna. When I first arrived on free soil, it was like a whole new world opened up to me. It was like more than flesh and blood. I felt like I spent a day in my free life compared to an entire year in my slave life. It was like escaping from a den of hungry lions, Yes, it's just words that I cannot describe. You know the scripture, the one from the good book that says, weeping endures for a moment, but joy comes in the morning. Oh my goodness, I am weeping no more, Anna. And the joy is so hard to put into words.
And you said for me to follow you north to New York.
Yes.
They brought with me the necessary basics to set up a home.
Oh, Anna, you are so wonderful. Without you, I would be a slave for the rest of my life.
I don't believe that. Smart as you are, you would have found another way to freedom.
Well, I have made arrangements with a minister, and we will be married in just a few days. I love you, Anna. We'll have a long and happy marriage.
Oh, and I love you, Frederick. Yes, a long and happy marriage, and with children.
Oh, yes, Anna, with children. And that's just what we did. We made New Bedford, Massachusetts, our new home. And it was there that I saw blacks and white Americans meeting together and very much opposed to slavery. Now, I had to meet these great people because this was like heaven to me. And once they found out I was a slave, they asked if I would speak at their meetings about it. Well, of course, I was very nervous about this because I had never spoke to an audience before, and they may send me back to my white masters. But great men like William C. Coffin and Wendell Phillips and the great William Lloyd Garrison assured me that I would be protected here and that my words would be very powerful for their anti-slavery movement. So I decided to speak for the very first time.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest speaker tonight, Mr. Frederick Douglass. Many years ago, Mr. Douglass was enslaved, but managed to escape. He is a symbol of all that we are working towards. Please, Mr. Douglass, would you say a few words to us about your time in servitude?
Yes, William, I will, but I'm sure you can understand I'm trying to forget everything about those years. William, I can't do it. I don't think you can. You can do this, Frederick. We need to hear your story. They need to hear your story. Okay. Yes. Yes. All right. You're right. It is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to separate
their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters. Must I argue? Thus a system marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong?
No.
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 No, I will not! I have better employment for my time and strength. Slavery is not divine.
Amen.
God did not establish it.
My friends, have we been listening to the testimony of a piece of property
No.
or a man?
Man.
Can we allow such a man to be treated as property?
No.
Can you doubt that it is the grossest of sin? Will you join us in fighting against this sin and this crime in which 3 million of our fellow human beings are treated not as fellow citizens, but as tools and property of men who use them to their own will and devices? Can we allow such a sin to continue? I think not!
No.
I did hundreds of speeches like that all over the globe. I was even popular in Europe as well, especially England and France. I was asked to put my life's experiences down on paper. And that's when I wrote the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. It sold 45,000 copies, more than any book had sold at that time. I hope 45 million people read this book. I bared my soul in these pages. But let me tell you about another man who bared his soul. I had a great friendship with one of the greatest men I've ever known. You see, it is one thing to be a white man or woman who was opposed to slavery. And it is another entirely different thing if he or she is willing to die for the elimination of slavery. Now, although I may have disagreed with the level of this man's haste, I will tell you this with the utmost certainty, that I will never meet another man or woman who is more passionate about racial equality, black or white. So, please, allow me to introduce my good friend, John Brown.
For most of my life, I lived as my father has taught me, as a nonviolent abolitionist, with the belief that every living soul has certain inalienable rights given to us by our Creator. What I learned at an early age was that there were a great many men who believed that the Negro man was not worthy of these rights and should in fact have them taken away, as well as any white man who befriended them. But it was not until I became much older that I witnessed the violent nature of these men. For one dark day, pro-slavers burned my son's farm in Kansas, destroying everything he and his family had worked for. Why would they do such a thing? They did this simply because my son lived as he was raised, to love thy neighbor, regardless of race or religious belief. That ruthless nature in those men woke me up. I've been called a violent man by a great many men, but you see, it was some of these same men who threw violence in my face and forced my hand when I realized that freedom for all black men could not be gained with love or words. Pro-slavers didn't believe in equality or doing unto others, and they could not speak the language of brotherhood. And such as these are not capable of empathy or compassion. Their hearts are filled with nothing but greed, indolence, and hypocrisy. And when a man's heart's poisoned to the core, the only language they understand is the language of violence. Gunfire! The edge of a sharp blade! These were the only ways to make those heathens understand we would not tolerate slavery anymore.
Well, as you can see, John Brown was a very forceful, God-fearing man. And he was going to start a revolt. He told me all about his plan one night.
Frederick.
Yes,
I
John.
must confide in you, my brother.
Yes.
I hope you believe me when I tell you that God spoke to me about how to end slavery. He whispered a plan in my ear and showed me a pathway to salvation for every black man, woman, and child.
Oh, John, what is this plan that you speak of?
Well, I do have some concerns, but I will not be able to carry out this plan without the proper funding. I do lack that. But once I have the finances in order, I'll be able to arm my men and secure the necessary provisions for our long journey. Frederick, I was really hoping this would be something you could help with. And with your help, I will lead a military revolt down to Virginia and overtake the largest arsenal in the entire country, the Federal Armory in Harper's Ferry. See, God showed me how this will open a gateway to the South and will be able to arm the thousands who will join us in our fight for freedom.
Oh, John. I cannot sanction violence and bloodshed, John. Your passion is like no other. If every white man were like you, this country would flourish. But every white man is not like you, John. And they own, like you said, the largest arsenal in the entire country. You'll be outnumbered, John. Outmanned. There has to be another way.
But there is no other way. Don't you see? The pro-slavers will continue their violent wrath against all that oppose them. And worst of all, they'll continue to own the Negro man until he's able to fight back. Frederick, your words, they are very powerful. But they are still just words. We need action. We need to stand up and fight for freedom.
Oh, I cannot sanction bloodshed and violence, John. I'm going to continue to speak my powerful words, as you state, and work on government policies. That is my path. Now, if this revolt is your path, I will not stand in your way.
Frederick, you know that I've always had the utmost respect for you and your work.
Of course, John.
And you should understand and forgive me when I tell you that it truly breaks my heart to hear that I do not have your support. But I do understand, my brother. But please know, even without your support, I will carry out this plan. It is God's will, and I must.
Yes.
This is the last time I see you, Frederick Douglass. I'll always consider you a great man, a true friend, and my brother in Christ.
I as well, John. I as well.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, John. John Brown's plan was not successful, unfortunately. John Brown, his men, his sons were all either killed or hung there at Harper's Ferry. But some say that that day was when the Civil War began. Yes. The next thing you know, the North is at war with the South. Now, the South, they did not want slavery to end. No, unfortunately. Their crop industry was sadly dependent upon it. Our president at the time was the famous Abraham Lincoln. And I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to meet with him. Thank you, Mr. President, for having brought me in promptly. Having seen the long line waiting to see you, I thought I'd be waiting most of the day.
Oh, I know who you are, Mr. Douglas. Please, sit down.
Thank you.
Mr. Seward over there has told me all about you. So I left instructions that you would go to the front of the line.
And I thank you for that courtesy, Mr. President.
Mr. Douglas, what do you consider to be the most disheartening feature in our present political and military situation?
Well, that would be the tardy, vacillating, hesitating policy of the President of the United States.
Well, I might seem slow, yes. But I should not be accused of vacillation, Mr. Douglas. I think it cannot be shown that once I have taken a position, I have ever retreated from it.
Yes. You have such an honest demeanor, Mr. President. I will continue to support you.
Thank you.
Yes. And I will continue to recruit freed Negro men to serve in your Union Army.
Very good.
Yes. But I would like to discuss with you for a few minutes your opinion of the constitutionality of slavery.
Well, yes. The Constitution recognizes the existence of slavery as a practical necessity. But, as you know, there is no constitutional right to own slaves.
Correct. So, because there is no mention of a right to own slaves, then the federal government must overthrow slavery everywhere.
Oh,
Yes. No, at long last you have issued the Emancipation Proclamation.
yeah.
But to me it seems incomplete. Because there are still millions of people still enslaved in this country, Mr. President. The Fugitive Slave Act, it is an immoral law. And I cannot sanction obedience to it.
Well, you are right, Mr. Douglas. And my legislators are working to eliminate all vestiges of injustice anywhere in this country.
Mr. President, the immigrationists give aid and comfort to white racists. The colonization premise, Mr. President, is that blacks can never live and compete effectively with whites as social and political equals. This belief is shared by most white Americans.
True, Mr. Douglas. And I want you to know, I will personally oppose any forced emigration of freed slaves. To me, they are now complete American citizens, and I will support their right to enjoy that citizenship right here in this country.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Douglas.
Mr. Lincoln had a tough time as a war president. His first primary task was the unification of the country. The emancipation and freedom of slaves was secondary. And even if slaves were to become free, I am not convinced that President Lincoln would have considered them equal. You see, just because you are free does not mean that you enjoy all freedoms. For example, blacks were not allowed to marry whites. My wife, Anna, died after 44 years of marriage. Without her, I would be a slave for the rest of my life. But 2 years later, I fell in love with a white woman named Helen Pitts. Someone who I've known for a long time. Her father, who was a great friend and abolitionist, did not approve of our marriage. No. Now, I was a man of some wealth and stature at that time, but my skin color was not acceptable for his family. But to Helen and I, our love was colorblind.
Oh, Frederick, it has been the best 10 years of my life with you.
Oh, mine too, Helen.
You know, we caused quite a scandal when we first started our courtship.
You mean because you are white? Well, actually, you are the same color as my father.
You know, I never even considered you and I to be a mixed race couple. To me, you have always just been the man that I love. That is the truth.
Yes, well, that is because, despite your father, you were raised in such an open environment and sent to schools to let your liberal mind flourish.
Yes, we worked on many of the same movements together, even before we met. I had always been a strong abolitionist and suffragette. Oh, and I had worshipped you from afar. How wonderful that we finally got to meet when we were working together in Washington.
Yes, yes, I was married at the time, but it took all my strength to resist getting close to you.
Oh, nothing would have happened, Frederick. Even though you are a very attractive man and a wonderful thinker, I have a lot of respect for your wife.
Yes, 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 she was a great woman. Without her, I would be a slave until emancipation.
I know that. You told me this story many times of how she helped to free you from your cruel master. I am so sorry that you had to go through such a thing. I'm sorry for the whole white race that ever even allowed slavery to exist.
Oh, I know. I don't hold it against the entire white race, Helen, but I do have some animosity toward those slave owners. I know our Methodist church teaches us to forgive, but sometimes that old hatred just swells up.
Must have been quite a church you went to, with Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman going to it.
Oh, yes.
I wish I had gotten to meet them.
Well, you did get to meet one great activist, Ida B. Wells.
Yes, I did. And I am married to the strongest activist of them all.
The passing of Frederick Douglass was reported by Margaret Turner, a journalist for the New York Times. Here are her words.
Frederick Douglass dropped dead in the hallway of his residence on Acosta Heights this evening at 7 o'clock. He had been in the highest of spirits and the best of health despite his 78 years when death overtook him. Upon returning home and dining, he had a chat in the hallway with his wife about the doings of the council. He grew very enthusiastic about one of the events of the day when he fell to his knees, hands clasped. Mrs. Douglass, thinking it was part of his description, was not alarmed. But as she looked over, he sank lower and lower until he laid flat upon the floor, breathing his last. Knowing he was ill, she lifted his head and understood that he was dying. Dr. J. Stewart Harrison injected a restorative into the patient's arm, but still, Mr. Douglass died, seemingly without any pain. The next morning, he was driven to Washington, accompanied by his wife. They stopped at the Congressional Library and then moved on to Meseret Hall, where Mr. Douglas attended the Women's Council. Mr. Douglas had been a long-time member of the Women's National Association for many years. He would sit next to Miss Susan B. Anthony, his longtime friend. That evening, upon hearing of his death, Miss Anthony was deeply affected. She was usually in great control of her emotions, but this evening she could not contain her feelings. Miss Anthony and Mr. Douglas became friends when they both resided in Rochester, New York. And that friendship lasted for many years.
And now, the 1895 Washington, D.C. funeral eulogy for Frederick Douglass by Susan B. Anthony.
Frederick Douglass has often been spoken of as the foremost man of the African race in America. Though born and raised in slavery, he managed, through his own perseverance and energy, to win for himself a place that not only made him beloved by all members of his own race in America, but also won for himself the esteem and reverence of all fair-minded persons. Mr. Douglass had for many years been a prominent figure in public life. He was of inestimable service to his own race and rendered distinguished service to his country from time to time in various important offices he held under the government. He held important offices almost constantly, from 1871 until 1891. In addressing a Negro school, March 24, 1893, at Easton, Maryland, near his birthplace, Mr. Douglass said, "I once knew a little colored boy whose mother and father died when he was but 6 years old. He was a slave and had no one to care for him.
He slept on a dirt floor in a hovel, and in cold weather he would crawl into a meal bag head foremost and leave his feet in the ashes to keep warm. He would find an ear of corn and roast that to satisfy his hunger. Or many times he would crawl under the stable and secure eggs and roast those in a fire and eat them. He didn't wear pantaloons as you do, but just a linen shirt. Schools were unknown to him. He learned to spell from a Webster's spelling book and taught himself how to read and write on posters that were on cellars and barn doors. This boy soon became a man and started preaching and speaking and became well known. This man is Frederick Douglass. Now, do not think that because you are colored, you can't accomplish anything. What is possible for me is possible for you. Strive earnestly to add to your knowledge.
So long as you remain in ignorance, so long will you fail to command the respect of your fellow men." has always been prominent in every movement, having in view the social and political advancement of women. And no later than yesterday afternoon, he was a welcome attendant at the session of the Women's National Council, where he was honored with a seat on this platform. He was kindly disposed to all, courteous and with gentle bearing, and by all alike, white and black, or of whatever creed, religion, or race. The news of his death will be met only with genuine regret.
Oh, had I the ability to reach the nation's ear, I would pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not a gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and humanity must be denounced. The American slave is a constant victim of gross injustice and inequality. America's liberty is an unholy license. The national greatness is swelling vanity. The shouts of liberty are empty, heartless sounds of equality. Prayers and hymns, sermons and thanksgivings, religious parades and solemnity are to the slave mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, hypocrisy, a thin veil of crimes that would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not another nation on this earth that is more guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour. Go search where you will. Roam through all the despotisms and monarchies of the old world. Travel through South America. Search out every abuse. And when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of this nation. And you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival!
I've been walking with my face turned to the sun. Weight on my shoulders, a bullet in my gun. got eyes in the back of my head, just in case I have to run. I do what I can when I can, while I can for my people. While the clouds roll back and the stars fill the night, that's when I'm